Well, I feel privileged because I have this privilege to be the last speaker of this Ignite stage, this very dynamic Ignite stage. And well, I hope that you still have some brain space after all this food for thoughts over the last 3 days. My name is Charles Baudion. I work at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and support the activities of its high-level risk forum, which works with OECD members and partner countries alike to strengthen their resilience to critical risks with a particular focus on risk governance. Risk governance being one of the 4 priorities of the Sendai Framework. So I will take you in this presentation through a journey on how Morocco improved its risk governance in the last few years, and that the OECD High-Level Risk Forum is very proud to have supported. But maybe first, why is risk governance important, and what do we mean by that? A few years ago at the OECD, what we realized, looking at how our members were managing their risks, is that many of them, they have invested in a series of capabilities to prepare for major risks, but how efficient is that? How effective is it? How aligned are all these efforts together? How can we really best reduce the risks at the lowest cost? For that, there was a main thinking that risk governance efforts were essential. What do we mean by this? We mean first that there needs to be a strong vision and leadership at the national level in order to really define objectives that are shared across governments towards resilience. Beyond this vision and leadership, a whole of government and multi-level coordination is absolutely essential, horizontally to mainstream disaster risk management across sectors, as well as vertically for implementation. In order also to have everyone within society, also the private sector, the scientific community, the communities themselves, civil society organizations and people make their efforts in this risk governance and risk management overall effort, the right incentives also need to be put in place by governments. This is all what is related to the institutional setup, but beyond that, when we talk about risk governance, we also include the idea of good governance, transparency, accountability on this disaster risk decision making, so which allow continuous policy improvement and that there's the most effective use of public resources. All those elements were included in the OECD recommendation on the governance of critical risks, which was the main contribution of the OECD to the Sendai Framework. So now coming to Morocco. Morocco is a very highly exposed country to multiple hazards and threats. Floods, earthquakes, droughts, the risk of tsunami are the most important critical risks of the country, and there's a very high concentration of people and assets in risk-prone area. For floods, really Morocco is hit every year by multiple kinds of floods, from coastal floods to riverine floods to flash floods to urban floods. Earthquakes zones are located in 2 major areas of the countries that concentrate high portions of its GDP and economic activities, around Agadir, where tourism is particularly important, and in the northern part of the countries. Droughts, when they happen every other year, can have significant impact on national GDP given the importance of the agricultural sector in the country. And there's an important risk of tsunami, which is a rare event, low probability, but potentially very high impact given the importance of the development in the coastline of Morocco. So what happened, as in many other countries, is that these are major disaster events that triggered policy reforms in disaster risk management. In 2004, the Al Hasema earthquakes was really the first led to the first important reflection at the government level on how to improve risk management. King Mohammed VI made a big speech to improve risk management at this occasion, and many efforts started in Morocco around that time. But they focused mostly on better emergency preparedness and response, given that that event had demonstrated poor performance of the risk management system. What happened 10 years after with a series of floods that have affected different parts of the countries, particularly in the south in 2014, where the whole southern part of the country was significantly disrupted by those floods with major socioeconomic impact, they tended to realize that all the efforts they had conducted over the last 10 years were not enough, and that risk governance became then a priority. Political will after those floods were particularly important to improve the overall system. And in addition to that, there were other policy priorities within Morocco, such as the decentralization process, the importance of public governance for better services to citizens, or the ongoing large infrastructures investments that were happening in the country, that were also provided some good momentum to rethink disaster risk management more broadly with this governance focus. So what did Morocco do? First, after adhering to this OECD recommendation on the governance of critical risks that I just mentioned, they decided to undertake an OECD peer review of their risk management policy. This is an independent analysis which takes an inclusive approach at really looking at all the different components of this disaster risk management policy and how it is implemented, with the scrutiny of international peers, which means people working in governments on risk management that are the peers of the risk managers of Morocco, and come to the country, visit them, ask them tons of questions to really identify what are the areas of improvements, what are the good practices as well, and provide recommendations. In that case, thanks to the support of the German Development Corporation, we had experts coming from the French government, the German government, and Switzerland to make that effort together. They went through the country at the national to the local level, met with a round of stakeholders, and identified numerous opportunities to shift gears towards improved resilience in the country. But what are the results of that effort? I mean, this effort provides, yes, a series of policy recommendations. We had 30 policy recommendations around all the different themes of risk management, from governance to risk assessment, prevention policies, emergency preparedness, recovery, and reconstruction. And that's an important roadmap for the future. But more importantly, in this kind of process, the benefits is really in the process itself as well. This allows a very large stakeholder engagement across government, across society, to agree on a common diagnosis and reach a consensus of what needs to be improved, what are the priorities. This peer review process also had a quite important impact nationally. It was endorsed at ministerial level, including at the Prime Minister level in the framework of the OECD country program in Morocco, as well as internationally. It was launched at the COP22 in Marrakesh, discussed at the OECD High-Level Risk Forum in Washington. So there was quite a lot of momentum around this analysis. But is that enough? No, it's not a report that you only want to put on a shelf. The importance then lies in its implementation. I'll come to that. Now, coming to governance, one of the main findings of the report relates specifically on that poor governance was hindering better progress on resilience, despite all the efforts in the last 10 years of those many stakeholders from civil protection, from the water sector, urban planning, environment, agriculture, public works. They were all having some strategies or had developed tools to improve risk management in the country and different instruments. But these were sort of disconnected. There was a lack of a vision on common objectives. These were mostly top-down policies for emergency response, where you had some form of coordination mechanisms that was set up, that was an important advancement, but that was not sufficient. And also focusing a lot in the prevention area on structural measures decided from the top. We had a lot of sectorial monohazards efforts, but a limited integration of all in development planning and sectoral strategies. And beyond that, this led to a weak accountability and risk-related decision-making, and a lot of capacity gaps as well at the local level, which led, at the end of the day, to a limited implementation of those quite interesting and good policy instruments. So that led us to make 6 recommendations in governance specifically, focusing on visibility of this policy to make it really a national priority, having a strong leadership and developing the right institutions for risk governance, strengthening horizontal and vertical coordination, as well as inclusion of the whole of society. Implementation. What did Morocco do after this series of recommendations? From the onset, they said, we don't want a report on the shelf, we want to implement. And what happened in the last 3 years are real major improvements in risk governance in Morocco. We just did a recent survey to look at those progress and assess them. There's now a clear strategic vision and strong leadership to foster risk management overall in the country. They decided, and that was quite smart and quite well aligned with the status of the country, to first shift to prevention, focus a lot on capacity development so that at the local level there could be real capacities to implement those policies. Third, to develop financial mechanisms with incentives for the local level to develop projects from not the top-down but the bottom-up approach, and also to develop some common tools across the different agencies in the country, such as joint early warning systems. All in all, this process in the last 3 years allowed a very large stakeholder engagement. They created for this prevention fund, which provides incentive mechanisms, a secretariat where different ministries work together to decide on the priorities. They decided to develop a national strategy with a series of interagency meeting and interministerial coordination. They did a series of workshops also with the support of the OECD, where all those different stakeholders contributed and participated very actively. And they are now in the process of developing a national strategy. All these efforts paved the way for this national strategy that is supposed to be adopted very soon, and to completely revise the institutional framework for risk management with the creation of a new directorate for risk management in the country, which will bring the expertise of the different ministries together to work on disaster risks. And the OECD worked with the government of Morocco to develop a roadmap for that. There have been efforts also to mainstream sectoral policies, to mainstream disaster risk management in sectoral policies, in the water sector, for instance, or with the creation of a new insurance instrument with the financial sector. Well, there are less efforts ongoing on working with civil society organizations. That's just an area that remains to be improved. In our analysis, the stakeholders nowadays in Morocco found that 82% of them found that there's a good strategic vision, and 64% consider it has become a national priority. Finally, on accountability, to demonstrate really this commitment towards improved risk governance in Morocco, is that they asked again to the OECD to evaluate their results and their performance on the implementation of those recommendations 3 years after we had delivered this to them. We did this self-assessment survey. We of course assessed this analysis we did expert analysis, fact-checking of this assessment survey. And when you look at overall the recommendation, what is really interesting to see, there's been progress in all the different areas. 22 out of the 29 recommendations have seen progress, but there is most progress on risk governance and on risk prevention, which were indeed the two priorities that were identified. As a conclusion, yes, we can say that Morocco is undergoing, it's a continuous effort, is undergoing major policy reforms to strengthen its disaster risk management policies and practices and their implementation. It has set up a series of tools and institutional reforms that are underway, and I can say that having worked very closely with Morocco over these last few years, we've seen the progress and we've seen the engagement of people around those issues. Vision and leadership at national level is a must to achieve these kinds of results, and tools like peer reviews really can provide good value to mobilize stakeholders and reach consensus on that direction. Accountability and continuous improvement, I think, is essential. We all agree to that in disaster risk management, and that's why good governance is key. So to conclude, I would say that the OECD high-level risk forum supports country risk governance and resilience efforts. And if you want to learn more about this journey that Morocco did, I look forward to discussing further with you. Thank you very much.